The gate opened slowly. That metal sound, that heavy, grinding scrape of iron, is something I will never forget for the rest of my life. I stood there, 61 years old, wearing the same clothes I had walked in with 14 years ago. The pants were too loose now. The shirt hung off my shoulders like it belonged to someone else, and maybe it did. Because the man who walked into that prison in 2009 was not the same man who walked out in 2023. My name is Harold Eugene Mercer. I was a businessman, a husband, a father, a brother, and for 14 years I was prisoner number 4471 B at Greystone Correctional Facility in the state of Georgia. I did not kill anyone. I did not steal. I did not do a single thing that the court said I did. And for 14 long, painful, humiliating years, I sat in a cell, alone, while the real world moved on without me. But here is the thing about the truth. It doesn't die. It doesn't sleep. It just waits. And on the morning of March 7th, 2023, the truth finally woke up. Stay with me, because what I found when I walked out of those prison gates, I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Let me take you back, way back, back to when life made sense. I grew up poor. I mean the kind of poor where you count the rice before you cook it. My mother, God rest her soul, raised 6 children in a 3-bedroom house in rural Alabama. My father worked 2 jobs and still couldn't always keep the lights on. But we had love, real love, the kind that doesn't need money to survive. I was the second born. My older brother, Raymond, was 3 years ahead of me. And from the very beginning, Raymond and I were different in every way. I was the quiet one, the one who sat in the corner reading books, dreaming about building something. Raymond was the charmer, the talker. He could walk into a room and make everyone smile within 5 minutes. People were drawn to him, women loved him, men wanted to be his friend. I used to admire that about Raymond. I used to think God gave him the personality and gave me the brains. Together we're unstoppable, and for a while we were. After high school, I worked every low-paying job imaginable: dishwasher, delivery driver, night shift security guard. Every dollar I saved, I put into one dream, a small logistics company that I started out of a rented garage in Atlanta in 1994. I called it Mercer & Sons Freight Solutions. I named it Sons because I believed one day my children would inherit something real, something built with honest hands. Raymond was my first employee. He handled the client relationships. He was good at it, too. I'll give him that. He could talk a client into anything, and I trusted him completely. By 2005, Mercer & Sons had grown into something I could barely believe. We had 42 trucks, contracts with 3 major retailers, and a valuation that a financial advisor told me had crossed the $50 million mark. $50 million, a boy from rural Alabama who used to count grains of rice. In 2001, I married the love of my life. Her name was Diane, beautiful Diane, with her warm brown eyes and her laugh that sounded like church bells on a Sunday morning. We had 2 children, my son Marcus, who was 7 years old when I went to prison, and my daughter Layla, who was only 4. Life was perfect, or so I believed, but they say the higher you climb, the harder someone can push you down. September 14th, 2009, that date is burned into my soul. I was called to an emergency meeting with the district attorney's office. I thought it was a contract dispute, a business misunderstanding. I put on my best suit. I kissed Diane on the cheek. I ruffled Marcus's hair. I told Layla, "Daddy will be back for dinner, baby girl." I did not come back for dinner. The charge, first, degree embezzlement and financial fraud. The accusation was that I had stolen over $4 million from our company's client accounts and laundered it through offshore shell companies. I sat in that chair, across from 3 detectives and the D.A. himself, and I felt the entire room spin. I said, "This is a mistake. There is no way." They showed me papers, bank documents, digital transfer records, signatures that looked like mine, an email trail that pointed directly at me. I called Raymond from the police station. My voice was shaking. "Raymond, they're saying I stole from the company. I need you here. I need you to help clear this up." Raymond said, "Harold, I'll do everything I can." He didn't come that night. My bail was set at $2 million. Raymond didn't post it. I hired a defense attorney with my personal savings. Raymond, who now had power of attorney over company finances, something I had signed over to him just 3 months earlier for what I thought was a routine business restructuring, froze my personal accounts pending the investigation. I sat in a county jail for 8 months before trial. My attorney told me the evidence was overwhelming. Digital fingerprints, server logs, a whistleblower from inside the company, someone I had never met, who claimed to have watched me authorize the transfers. I never authorized anything. I never touched those accounts, but the jury didn't know that. And on April 29th, 2010, they read the verdict. Guilty, 15 to 20 years, with possibility of parole after 12. I remember looking at the gallery. Diane was there, crying, her hand over her mouth. Marcus was holding her arm. Raymond sat 2 rows behind them. And in that moment, just before the officers took me away, I looked at Raymond's face. He didn't look sad. He didn't look devastated. He looked relieved. I didn't understand it then. I filed it away in the back of my mind. But that image, Raymond's face, the absence of grief, would haunt me for 14 years. Prison breaks a man in ways that have no name. I won't describe every painful detail, but I will tell you this. The worst pain was not the concrete walls. It was not the terrible food, or the constant fear, or the loneliness that felt like a physical weight on your chest. The worst pain was the silence from home. Diane visited me 4 times in the first year, then twice the second year, then once. Then she stopped coming. Her letters became short, then shorter, then they stopped entirely. Marcus wrote to me until he was about 14, then his letters stopped too. I understood it in a way. A teenage boy doesn't want a jailbird father. A teenage boy wants to move forward. I didn't blame him. I still don't. Raymond visited me exactly once, in 2011. He sat across from me in the visitation room, wearing a suit I recognized, one I used to own, and he said, "Harold, I'm doing my best to hold the company together. Don't worry about anything." I asked him, "How is Diane? How are the kids?" He said, "They're fine. Everyone is fine." He smiled at me. That same wide, easy smile he'd always had. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that while I sat in that cell, believing that my family was being taken care of, Raymond was systematically dismantling everything I had ever built. He removed my name from the company. He restructured the board. He used his power of attorney, the document I had signed in trust, to reroute ownership of Mercer and Sons into his own name. It was done slowly, carefully, over several years, with the help of an attorney whose loyalty I later learned Raymond had bought. And Diane filed for divorce in 2012, 2 years into my sentence. I received the papers through my prison counselor. There was no explanation letter, no phone call, just papers, and a note at the bottom in her handwriting. "I'm sorry, Harold. I have to think about the children." I signed them. What choice did I have? By 2015, my sources inside told me, through occasional letters from an old friend named Vernon, who kept his ear to the ground, that Diane had remarried. She had married Raymond. My wife had married my brother. I want you to feel that for a moment. I want you to understand what that knowledge does to a man in a cell with nowhere to go and nothing to hold. I cried that night. I cried until there was nothing left inside me, And then I made a decision. I would survive. Not for revenge, not yet. I would survive because I had children out there, Marcus and Layla, who one day might need to know the truth. I would survive because something in my gut told me that the truth was still alive, somewhere, waiting. And I am a patient man. In 2019, 10 years into my sentence, I received an unexpected visitor. His name was Daniel Foss. He was a young attorney, couldn't have been more than 32 years old, working for a nonprofit organization called the Conviction Review Project. They specialized in wrongful convictions. He sat across from me and said, "Mr. Mercer, I've been looking at your case for 8 months. I think you were set up." I stared at him for a long time. Then I said, very quietly, "I know." Daniel had found something that my original defense attorney had missed, or maybe hadn't wanted to find. The digital transfer records that had been used as primary evidence against me had metadata inconsistencies. In simple language, the timestamps on the files had been manipulated. The records showed transfers happening at times when server logs proved the system was inactive. Someone had fabricated the evidence, badly, but badly enough that it only became visible with the kind of forensic software that didn't widely exist in 2009. Over the next 4 years, Daniel and his team worked tirelessly. They deposed witnesses. They found the so-called whistleblower, the man who had testified that he'd seen me authorize transfers, and discovered that he had been paid by a third-party financial firm that had since been dissolved, a firm registered under a shell company that, when traced all the way back, led to one name. Raymond Clarence Mercer, my brother had framed me. He had stolen my company, stolen my wife, stolen 14 years of my life, and he had done it deliberately, carefully, and with the cold patience of someone who had been planning it for years. When Daniel told me, I sat very still for a very long time. Daniel asked, "Mr. Mercer, are you okay?" I said, "I need a moment." He gave me that moment. And in that moment, I thought about Raymond's face on the day of my verdict, that look of relief. I thought about how he had handled the power of attorney. I thought about every small thing that, over 14 years of silence and reflection, had begun to form a picture I hadn't wanted to see. The picture was complete now. On March 7th, 2023, after a formal review by the state of Georgia, my conviction was vacated. Overturned, I was declared innocent of all charges. I walked out of Greystone Correctional Facility into the thin, cold morning air of early spring. There was no one waiting for me, no family, no wife, no children. Just Daniel standing by a car, holding a paper coffee cup, and looking at me with eyes full of something I can only describe as grief on my behalf. He handed me the coffee. I took it with both hands. I looked up at the sky, gray and wide and endless, and I breathed. Then I said, "Daniel, I need you to make some calls." He nodded. "I've already started." Daniel drove me to a modest hotel near downtown Atlanta. He had arranged it through the nonprofit. Clean room, small, a window that looked out at a parking lot. But to me, it was a palace. I spent the first 3 days doing almost nothing, sleeping in a real bed, eating real food, sitting in silence that felt completely different from prison silence. This silence was mine. I owned it. On the 4th day, I called my daughter Layla. She was 17 when I had last seen her. She was 31 now. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello," her voice, just her voice nearly destroyed me right there. I had to collect myself before I could speak. "Layla, it's Dad." The silence on her end lasted a long time. Then she said, very carefully, "Dad." "Yes, baby girl, it's me." Another silence, and then she started crying. Not soft crying, the kind that shakes a person, and I realized something important. Layla had not been told the full story. She had been kept in the dark. We talked for 2 hours. She told me things that burned like acid. She told me that Raymond and Diane had told the children that I was guilty. that I had stolen from innocent people, that I had shamed the family. Marcus had believed it entirely and had cut all contact. Layla had always had doubts, always. But she had been young, confused, and surrounded by people who told her not to trust her own instincts. She told me that Raymond now lived in the house I had bought. My house. The 6-bedroom colonial in Sandy Springs with the wraparound porch, where I used to sit every Sunday morning with my coffee and my newspaper. She told me that Raymond drove the cars I had paid for, entertained clients at the office I had built, and slept in the bedroom I had shared with Diane. She told me that every time she asked questions growing up, Raymond would say, "Your father was sick, Layla, greedy, let's not speak about him." And Diane would simply go quiet and leave the room. I listened to all of this without saying a single word. When Layla finished, she asked me, "Daddy, what are you going to do?" I said, "Nothing rash. I'm going to do things the right way." She said, "Are you angry?" I thought about that honestly. Then I said, "I'm beyond anger, baby girl. I'm at peace. And that's the most dangerous thing Raymond should be afraid of." A patient man with nothing to lose and the truth on his side is the most powerful force in the world. 3 weeks after my release, I called Raymond, not to threaten, not to yell. I simply called him from a number he wouldn't recognize, and I said, "Raymond, it's Harold." Dead silence. Then, slowly, he said, "Harold, I heard you got out. I did. Listen, I'm not calling to argue, Raymond. I just want to meet, have coffee, like brothers." Another long pause. He was calculating, trying to figure out what I knew, what I didn't know, what angle I was playing. Finally, he said, "Sure, yeah, that would be good. Let me talk to Diane, just us." I said, "Just brothers." We met at a diner near Peachtree Road 2 days later. I arrived first and sat in a booth by the window. Raymond walked in 10 minutes late. He looked older, heavier, grayer at the temples. He was wearing a very expensive watch. I recognized it. It had been mine. He slid into the booth across from me and studied my face. I gave him nothing. He said, "You look good, Harold, all things considered." I said, "You look comfortable." A brief flicker of something crossed his face. Then the smile returned. "Harold, listen, I know this is difficult, and I want you to know everything I did running the company, being there for Diane and the kids, I did it because I had to. Someone had to step up." I looked at him. I let the silence stretch. He kept talking. Nervous people always keep talking. Diane was falling apart. The kids needed stability. The company was in crisis. I didn't have a choice, Harold. I want you to understand that. I took a sip of my coffee. I set the cup down gently. I looked him in the eye and I said, very quietly, "Raymond, do you love me?" He blinked. He clearly hadn't expected that. "Of course I do. You're my brother." "Then tell me the truth," I said. "Right here, right now, just the two of us. Tell me what you did." His face went very still. The smile disappeared. And for one fraction of a second, just one, I saw something behind his eyes. Guilt. Real, raw guilt. Then it was gone, and the mask went back up. He said, "Harold, I don't know what you think happened, but..." I raised one hand to stop him. Gently, patiently, I said, "It's okay, Raymond. You don't have to say anything." I put a $20 bill on the table for the coffee. I picked up my jacket. I stood up, and I said, very calmly, very quietly, "My lawyer will be in touch." I walked out into the sunlight, and I didn't look back. Daniel had not been idle. In the weeks after my release, while I was taking my time, processing and breathing, Daniel and his team had been building what he described to me as the most comprehensive civil case I have seen in 20 years of law. The lawsuit we filed against Raymond Clarence Mercer was 47 pages long. It included charges of fraud, civil conspiracy, perjury by proxy through the paid witness, breach of fiduciary duty, unlawful transfer of assets, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We were seeking full restoration of the company back, payment of 14 years of profits at current valuation, which had now grown to an estimated $88 million, and additional punitive damages for the fabrication of evidence that had resulted in my wrongful imprisonment. We also filed a separate complaint with the State Bar against the attorney who had facilitated the fraudulent ownership transfer. And we filed a criminal referral with the District Attorney's Office, a new D.A., one who had nothing to do with my original conviction, requesting that Raymond be investigated for evidence, tampering, fraud, and conspiracy to commit perjury. When Raymond was served with the papers, I was told by Layla, who still lived near the house, that he came home, read the documents, and sat in a chair in the living room without speaking for 4 hours. Diane apparently asked him, "Raymond, what's happening?" He said nothing. She asked again, "Raymond, talk to me. What did you do?" And then, Layla told me, Raymond looked up at Diane and said 3 words, "I'm so sorry." Diane didn't understand what he meant. Not yet, but she was about to. When the civil case began to generate news coverage, and it did, because a wrongfully imprisoned man suing his own brother for stealing his $50 million company is not a quiet story. Everything that had been hidden for 14 years began to surface. Former employees of Mercer and Sons came forward. 3 of them. They had known something was wrong with the financial transfers, but had been afraid to speak up. They had watched Raymond slowly take control, and had told themselves it wasn't their business. The paid witness, the man who had testified against me at trial, gave a full statement to investigators. He was a former accountant named Gerald Pitt, and he said that Raymond had paid him $120,000 to testify falsely. He said he had been ashamed for 14 years and had never slept properly since. He sat in a television interview, his face old and weathered and sorry, and he said, "Harold Mercer was an innocent man. I lied, and I will spend the rest of my life knowing what that cost him." When I saw that interview, I did not feel victorious. I felt tired, just very, very tired. But then something happened that I had not expected. Marcus called me. My son Marcus, who had believed for 20 years that his father was a criminal, had apparently been watching the news coverage from his apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina. He was 33 years old now. I didn't know what he looked like as an adult. I had missed his entire adult life. He called me from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, he said, "Dad." His voice sounded nothing like the 7-year-old boy I remembered. It was deep, adult, and it was cracking. "Marcus," I said. "Dad, I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. I know, son. They told me you were guilty. Uncle Raymond always said, and Mom never corrected him. So I thought." "Marcus, stop." He stopped. "I know," I said. "I know." He cried. My grown son cried on the phone, and it was both the most painful and the most beautiful thing I had experienced in 14 years. Because it meant he was real, he was alive, he was mine. "I want to see you, Dad." He said, "Can I see you?" I said, "I've been waiting 14 years to hear that." 2 months after the legal proceedings began, Diane requested a private meeting, not through lawyers. She called Layla and asked if Layla thought I would be willing to meet her alone. Layla asked me. I thought about it for 24 hours. Then I said yes. We met in a park. She was 60 now. The warm brown eyes were the same, but there were lines around them that hadn't been there before. She had aged in ways that were hard to look at, not because she wasn't beautiful, but because I could see the weight she had been carrying. She sat across from me on a park bench, and for a long time neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I failed you, Harold." I didn't argue with her. "I was scared," she said. "When you went to prison, I was scared and alone, and Raymond was there, and he was—" She stopped. Her hands were folded in her lap, and they were trembling. He was very convincing. He had papers. He had documents. He had explanations for everything, and I was broken, Harold. I was so broken. I said, I know. That's not an excuse. No, I agreed. It isn't. She looked at me then, fully. Are you angry at me? I thought about that carefully. Honestly, the way I had learned to think carefully and honestly over 14 years of having nothing but time. I said, I was, for a long time. The anger was enormous, Diane. You don't want to know the size of it. She nodded. But I'm not angry anymore. I'm sad. There's a difference. She started to cry. Quietly, I'm going to leave him, she said. I filed paperwork last week. I nodded slowly. She said, Harold, I'm so sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to hear it from my own mouth. I'm sorry. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, Diane, I forgive you, not for you, for me, because I cannot carry that weight anymore. We sat in that park for another hour, not saying much, just two people who had once loved each other, sitting quietly with the wreckage of what betrayal does to a life. When she left, she turned once and looked back at me. I raised my hand, a small wave. She nodded and walked away. Some stories don't end with reunion. They end with release, and release sometimes is enough. 14 months after I filed the civil suit, the case settled. Raymond's legal team fought for as long as they could, but the evidence was overwhelming. Forensic audit alone was devastating. It showed in irrefutable detail how Raymond had systematically transferred company assets over 6 years using my power of attorney, restructured ownership using fraudulent documentation, and paid the attorney who facilitated it. Raymond Clarence Mercer agreed to a settlement that included full transfer of all company assets back to my name, payment of $2 million representing 14 years of accumulated profits and damages, and a signed confession, a legal admission of liability that would become part of the public record. Separately, the criminal investigation resulted in Raymond being charged with fraud, conspiracy, and evidence tampering. I did not push for the maximum sentence. I am not a vindictive man, but I did not ask for leniency either. I let the law do what the law is designed to do. Raymond was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison. The attorney, who had helped him, was disbarred and sentenced to 4 years. Gerald Pitt, the paid witness who had finally told the truth, received a reduced sentence in exchange for his full cooperation. He served 18 months. When the sentence was read in court, I sat in the gallery. Marcus was on my left. Layla was on my right. She held my hand. Marcus stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Raymond was led past us on his way out of the courtroom. He stopped. The officers allowed it. And he looked at me. I expected many things from that moment. I expected rage or fear or the arrogance that had always been his armor. Instead, Raymond looked at me with the eyes of a man who had finally run out of places to hide from himself. He said, Harold, I said softly, don't. He nodded, and they took him away. Marcus let out a long, slow breath beside me. Then he said, quietly, I'm sorry I didn't believe you, Dad. I put my arm around my son's shoulder, my 33-year-old son, this man I barely knew, this stranger who shared my blood and my name, and I said, I'm just glad you're here now. Layla squeezed my other hand. And in that moment, in that courtroom, surrounded by the dust of everything that had been destroyed, and the fragile beginning of what might be rebuilt, I felt something I had nearly forgotten how to feel: peace. I am not a man who dwells in the past. Not anymore. I cannot afford to be. Mercer and Sons Freight Solutions was returned to me in full. The company had grown even during Raymond's management. The logistics industry had boomed, and I found myself at 61 years of age at the head of an $88 million operation. I could have retired. I should have, perhaps, by anyone's measure. Instead, I went back to work. I promoted the employees who had been loyal and hardworking. I met with clients. I walked the yards where the trucks were lined up, and I ran my hand along the side of one of them, a big white 18-wheeler with the Mercer and Sons logo, and I felt something close to tears, but didn't quite let them come. My son Marcus eventually relocated to Atlanta. He works with me now. He is learning the business that was always meant to be his inheritance. Sometimes he sits across from me at my desk, and I catch myself just staring at him. This man, this son, this person I missed growing up. He catches me staring sometimes, and he gives me a look that is somewhere between embarrassed and touched, and he says, "What?" I say, "Nothing. I'm just looking at you." He shakes his head, but he's smiling. Layla, my youngest, got her master's degree while I was in prison. She works as a social worker now, advocating for families separated by the criminal justice system. I could not be more proud of her if I tried. She told me once, "Daddy, all those years growing up, something told me the story I was hearing wasn't right." I never fully believed them. I asked her, "Why not?" She said, "Because of the way you used to look at me when I was little. A man who looks at his daughter that way is not a bad man." I just held on to that. She held on to one memory of how her father looked at her, and that one memory kept the door open for 14 years. Never underestimate the power of how you love someone. Part 13. What I learned in the dark. People ask me sometimes. They ask in interviews. They ask on the street. They ask with genuine puzzled faces. They ask, "Harold, how did you survive? How did you stay sane?" I always give the same answer. I chose to believe that the truth was stronger than the lie. Every single day, I made that choice. On the days when I couldn't make that choice from strength, I made it from stubbornness, and on the days when I couldn't manage either, I made it because there was simply nothing else to do. I also learned the value of silence. When Raymond tried to provoke me in that diner, I was silent. When Diane gave me reasons and explanations, I was quiet. When people on the street recognized me from news coverage and said unkind things, because some people still believe the original story, and some people never update their minds, I was silent. Not because I was weak, not because I had nothing to say, but because I had learned, in 14 years of enforced silence, that the most powerful response is often no response at all. A person who screams and rages gives their enemy something to grab onto. A person who stands still and quiet is impossible to fight. I became impossible to fight, and in the end, I didn't need to fight at all. I just needed to wait and to hold onto the truth and to let it do what truth always does. Eventually, when given enough time, the truth never needs your help. It just needs your patience. If you take nothing else from my story, take this. The people who hurt you most in this life are usually the people closest to you, not strangers, not enemies, the people sitting at your dinner table, the people who know your weaknesses because you trusted them with those weaknesses, the people who know the combination to every lock you have. Guard your trust, not your heart. Leave your heart open, but guard your trust. Give it slowly. Watch carefully how people behave when they think there is nothing in it for them. That is when you see who they really are. And to those of you who have been betrayed, who have been lied about, abandoned, used, discarded, I want to say something directly to you. Your silence is not weakness. Your patience is not passivity. Your refusal to become bitter is not naivety. It is the highest form of strength that exists. The people who hurt me did not win. They had 14 years of my life, yes. They had money that was mine, a house that was mine, a family that was mine. For 14 years, they lived in the life I had built, but they could not have my character. They could not have my integrity. They could not have the man I chose to remain, even behind prison walls, even in the darkness, even when every reason to become something ugly was laid right before me. They could not have that, because that was mine, and nobody can take from you what lives inside you. Raymond sits in a cell now, a much nicer cell than the one I occupied, I'm told, but a cell. I do not celebrate that. I do not rejoice in it. He is my brother, and somewhere inside him is the boy who grew up in the same poor house with me, who shared the same thin blankets, who looked up at the same Alabama sky and probably dreamed the same kinds of dreams, Somewhere, that boy exists, and I grieve for that boy. I grieve for what he became, but I grieve for myself, too, for my lost years, for the moments with my children I can never have back, for the Sundays on the porch I never got, for the father I should have been and couldn't be, through no fault of my own. I give myself permission to grieve those things, and then I put them down, because I have today, and tomorrow, and the years ahead, and my children, grown, complicated, beautiful, who are still here. That is enough. That is more than enough. My name is Harold Eugene Mercer. I am 61 years old. I built something from nothing. I lost everything, and I got most of it back. Not all of it. You never get all of it back. The years don't return. The childhood moments don't return. Some versions of the relationships don't return. But the man I am, he came back stronger than the man who went in, and every morning now I sit on the porch of a new house, not the one Raymond took, a different one, mine in a way that cannot be disputed by anyone, and I drink my coffee and I listen to the birds, and I think about how many mornings I was denied this simple, ordinary, perfect thing, and then I stop thinking about what I was denied, and I just drink the coffee, because this morning is mine, and it is enough. The people who wrong you are not your judges. God is your judge. Time is your judge. And the quiet dignity of a life lived with integrity will always, always outlast the temporary satisfaction of a stolen one. Thank you for watching this story. If Harold's journey moved you, if it reminded you of your own strength, your own patience, your own belief that truth eventually wins, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. We tell real human stories here, stories about resilience, about love, about the quiet power of people who refuse to give up. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss a story, because every life has a story, and every story deserves to be heard.